Hello and welcome to another morning briefing here at We Are Sunderland. I'm Joe Ramage. I'm joined by Dom Shaw on Friday, the 14th of June. We're coming to you in partnership with the Fans Museum and Cospex Opticians. I'm wondering how long I can skirt around before we get stuck into head coach stuff. I mean, first of all, I suppose happy European Championships Day and happy transfer window opening day.
Yeah, I mean the transfer window opening a few times in the last month or so. We've talked about the head coach situation, haven't we? And said like it's got to be resolved by the time the window opens. It's got to be resolved by the time pre-season starts. Here we are. We'll get on to that. I'm looking forward to Euros though. I'm buzzing for that now. Are you?
Yeah, I'm pleased that it's one of them where I usually get really into it sort of the week building up, but it's been quite a slow burner for me. But now that it's here and you're seeing the videos of like fans and everyone out there, and obviously the first game tonight is going to be good, and then England on Sunday. Yeah, I'm one of these sort of seasoned ones where I really get into the tournaments. But obviously the last few have been really good, haven't they? I know they ended in sort of glorious failure, but they've it's been easy to get invested in England, I think. So I'm quite looking forward to it. How do you think that they're going to get on?
I think the group will be a doddle. Really, it should be, shouldn't it? Wouldn't surprise me if they maybe drew one, but
worries that it's going to be that they might stumble a little bit. I think they'll get through, but I think it's harder than what it looks.
There are some tough groups, aren't there? When you look at the other groups, we were only talking about this last night because myself and Scott Wilson did a preview of it, so I've still got the groups here. And when you look at I think Scotland are in a brutal group. Germany, Hungary, Switzerland. Because I think Hungary will surprise a few. Spain, Croatia, Italy, and Albania. Spain, Croatia, and Italy. It's easy to get drawn in by their names because they're not as strong as they maybe have been previously. You still wouldn't fancy playing any of them in a group stage, would you? And then even further down, Poland, Netherlands, Austria, France. Yeah, I think semi-final. It's France. It's semi-finals. France. It works out, doesn't it? I think if that was the case, England to get beat by France in the semis. That'd be mine.
Yeah, I find it hard to look beyond France personally. But I mean, I just look at the game on Sunday, and there's doubts about Stones, isn't there? And you just wonder what sort of lineup's going to be playing there. And you've seen it before in tournaments where they've struggled against teams. You'd expect them to be an opener, or it's been quite lethargic. You think it was the Russia one back last time in France. So I don't know. I think they'll get through the group, but yeah, I don't see them getting past France. Or even if they were to meet Germany in Germany, you think that's going to be something like that. That would be difficult. So, but no, I'm looking forward to it. And I'm pleased it's getting. It's always good when there's summer tournament on. The odd year out when there isn't one on, you miss it, don't you? I know we all kind of crave the end of the season when it gets there, and you enjoy that little break. But when the summer tournament kicks in, it gets the juices flowing again. I think a bit for me, doesn't it?
Well, when our England predictions there aren't the most upbeat start to a video, and I'm afraid the tone of this isn't really going to change much in the next half an hour or so in the last week. How many times? I think there was a week when Marti was off, and so me and you did 2 or 3 videos, didn't we, in a few days when there'd been various developments. And we kind of find ourselves repeating ourselves, apologetically repeating ourselves. I think we're going to be doing it again, aren't we? Because not that much has changed really in the last few weeks. The obvious, let's get straight into head coach stuff. The obvious one since we last spoke is Rosenior. Cifuentes now favourite, but with the bookies. But as things stand now, from where I'm sitting, there doesn't seem, and clearly I might be way off with this. I hope I am. There doesn't seem an obvious front runner, maybe for the first time, certainly since the end of the season.
Yeah, it feels like that. I mean, the Rosenior stuff, it almost felt to me as though that was it. I thought we were getting somewhere. I mean, the will still knock back has clearly set them back. I don't think it's any secret that he was the leading candidate to try and to go in there, and for him to knock them back or hold out, have reservations, has set them back. Pascal Janssen, we don't necessarily know how far down the line that was. Obviously, he's found another club now in Hungary this week, another development there. You wonder again, similar to still, there's European football on offer. I think Ferencváros won the championship, didn't they, in Hungary? So they're going to be in Champions League qualification next season. Just based on that, you can possibly understand why both Still and Janssen would move to clubs who are in Europe. At the same time, that doesn't really do Sunderland any favours, does it? Or it doesn't help them in terms of how supporters would feel about it. So then when it came back to Rosenior, I think we said on Monday that we'd understood that he'd held talks, and then it came out that he was coming back for second talks. Felt as though we were getting somewhere, and we've spoke about Rosenior before, haven't we? In terms of, I think he got a bit of a harsh deal at Hull, the way that he got sacked. People scrutinising, saying that did he fail with the sort of squad that he had? Was it a squad that was that much better than Sunderland's? I don't know. I mean, there was some loan fees in there. You look at Carvalho and things like that. But I think if you look at when Rosenior went in at Hull to where he's left them, you can't say anything other than he's done a pretty decent job there. So he fit the bill a little bit for me. I thought that would have been a decent enough appointment. And I think everyone's at the point now where you think, let's just get somebody in and let's get cracking. Because like we said at the start of the video here, the transfer window is now open. Players come back, in about a fortnight's time. You're now in the cycle of the new season, aren't you? I think we've gone through that threshold of this season, last season, next season. It's now very much this season being sort of 24-25 campaign. There's a line under last year now. And we're still now almost back to square one. I mean, the Cifuentes one. I don't know. What do you think about that? The compensation's obviously the key factor there, but I think for me, with Rosenior dropping out, I almost think you can understand why they'd be tempted to now go and get Cifuentes and pay the compensation, because we've gone round in circles that much now, where at least if they were to go out now and spend compensation and get someone else out of a club, it shows a little bit of intent that has probably been lacking over the course of the last 4 months. So at least that would be a start to try and build some bridges with supporters, at least saying that, right, we're willing to go out and get someone now. Yeah, it might not be first or second choice or however far down the list it might be, but it just feels as though if they were to go and get somebody else out of a club, at least it shows that they're willing to go and do that, rather than you're looking for the next sort of option out of work, one of the unnamed candidates that's been mentioned or been referenced that there are unnamed candidates, sorry, whoever that might be. I mean, who could that be? You don't know, do you?
No, I mean, the bookies odds and no guide for a managerial market either. But you can't help but be drawn to the list. Frank Lampard's there, for example, who's clearly out of work and you suspect would jump at the chance to manage a championship team. Would Lampard be a good appointment? I think there's serious question marks about Lampard's.
Well, I mean, you'd be surprised if Lampard hasn't been considered or spoken to. I mean, if you think back to the League One period, where before the appointment Alex Naylor came out recently, didn't he? John Terry was interviewed, for example. So in that sense, you'd probably be surprised if Lampard hasn't been one of the names on the list considered, or have they spoken to him? Have they reached out? Have they crossed him off? This is purely guesswork, but I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if he was one of the so-called unnamed sources at this stage.
No, I wouldn't.
It's surprising that hasn't come out as well.
Yeah, we are so far down the line with it now that I wonder whether me or you would have been shortlisted at some point. We're so far down the line, aren't we? That you would. People like Lampard, and again, we're just talking like speculatively here, purely, but you would think like people of that ilk will surely have been sounded out. The fact that there are unnamed candidates, or so we're kind of led to believe that there are unnamed candidates, suggests that maybe one or two are from overseas, where it might be easier to keep things under wraps. With someone like Lampard, for example, in a summer where there have been so many championship vacancies, you would imagine that unless someone like Lampard, again talking speculatively, was nailed on to get the Sunderland job, their representatives would be keen to get the name out there, just to kind of prick the ears and prick the interest of the other interested clubs, like we've seen with several, haven't we? So there's been 2 or 3 whose names have come out, and it's been immediately clear where it's come from, where an agent may be sensing the opportunity to throw a client's name into the mix when they were quite swiftly dismissed. I think Liam Rosenior would have been an excellent appointment, a really good appointment. I think he's on the way up. I think he's got a high ceiling. I think he did a good job at Hull. I was baffled by Hull's approach in the January window. I think we've touched on this previously. From what I gather, some of the deals, some of the loan fees, some of the wages they were splashing around completely blew other Championship clubs who were going for similar players out of the water. Now, my feeling at the time was, I think Hull were 9th, 10th. At the time, they were jostling with, Sunderland were maybe slightly out the picture, but clubs like Middlesbrough, Norwich, a few teams who were like on the fringes. But I looked at Hull and thought, well, even if they did manage to sneak in, and I know this might sound slightly defeatist, but I'll get to the point. In what is widely acknowledged to have been a brutal Championship campaign, how likely would they have been to win those playoffs? Wouldn't a wiser approach, and I know you can't pick and choose when you're having a promotion tilt, but wouldn't a wiser approach have been to realise with someone like Rosenior, we're on the right track, let's continue to take steps, look to the summer window, and next year when the Championship isn't going to be as brutal, we might, because there's no obvious favourites as things stand for the Championship next season. If Hull had continued to make progression, you'd have been looking at them now and thinking that they're one of the real fancies, whereas now they're the great unknowns. I think Rosenior is one of those whose stock has, if not risen with the sacking, because of how much talk there's been surrounding how much of a surprise it is, how good a job it is, if not risen, it's certainly intact. And obviously there's the strong Burnley links. Now, the kind of suggestions were this week, and I think this is where Rosenior is different to other candidates, whereas Pascal Janssen was categorically ruled out, Will Still categorically ruled out. Rosenior, that wasn't necessarily the case. The indications were Rosenior knew that Burnley were hot on him, so he was clearly wanting to wait to bide his time and see how that plays out. I know with our Sunderland hats on, we don't want to hear that, but you would, wouldn't you? Burnley have just come down, parachute payments, stronger squad, well equipped to go back up again. You would understandably want to see how that plays out. The problem is Sunderland haven't got time on the side. We've had the statement last week talking about how there's a hope for an imminent appointment, and if Rosenior is going to leave it 2 weeks and Sunderland wait for 2 weeks and then Rosenior gets the Burnley job, then where does Sunderland go?
Yeah.
Now, what if 2 or 3 weeks down the line, Scott Parker gets the Burnley job and Sunderland are still without a head coach? Is that revisited? It's absolutely not beyond the realms of possibility. But Sunderland can't wait, can they? They need to crack on with other targets now, which we're led to believe they are doing.
You've sort of taken the question that I was going to ask you there. It feels now, not that they might not have been before, but it certainly feels now that the club are almost at the point where they accept they can't hang around anymore. If the Rosenior stuff would have been a couple of weeks sooner, they might have said, "Oh, we can give you a little bit of leeway." But it feels as though they're quite acknowledging of the frustration in the fan base now, because it's there. I mean, with another supposed candidate, if Rosenior's waiting out for Burnley, that will be 3 candidates potentially, where it's publicly been a case of an agreement not being able to be met. Whichever way you look at it, it doesn't look good on the club, does it? You can't dress it up any other way. With Still, Janssen, and Rosenior looking elsewhere. 1, you can give them a little bit of rope with. 2, I don't know. 3, you're starting to wonder a little bit what's going on here, and you can totally understand why supporters would be annoyed and frustrated now.
And the obvious question from that then is why? Why haven't you been able to land your targets? Why has there been kind of these high-profile public snubs? Is it finances? Is it disagreements over transfers? Is it coaching? The identity of the coaching team, the makeup of the coaching team? I think we're in a position now where when an appointment is made, and the unveiling takes place, if the new head coach is flanked by Christian Speakman, he's probably going to get as many questions about the process of appointing a new head coach as the new head coach is going to get about his kind of vision and hopes for the future at Sunderland, because we haven't heard from him, because other than that short statement from Kieran Louis-Dreyfus last week, we haven't heard from anyone in a position of power at Sunderland. These are questions that need answering, don't they? These are concerns that need easing moving forward. What have been the issues that have prevented you from landing targets? Why? What are we, 115 days, 116 days now on? Why are we still waiting? And as you were saying about the kind of feel for there's now a recognition of the need for urgency. I think there's a recognition of urgency for so many reasons, really. A, the mood in the fan base in the city, undoubtedly. B, the transfer window. C, the fact the players are coming back soon. And the contract issues that have slipped out in the last week. Chris Rigg, Dan Neil, understandable caution there. And we are repeating ourselves here, as I apologise for at the top, but with each passing day, with each passing week, there's just more and more questions, aren't there?
Yeah, I'm going to come on to those contracts shortly. Just on the statement, because I know it came out last week, and I didn't speak to you last week, but what did you make of that? Matty asked me on Monday about it, and I sort of, like, my belief was always that if the time for a statement was right at the end of the season, after that Sheffield Wednesday game, you draw a line under the season there, can update supporters what the previous 2 months had been like in the managerial search, take a bit more acknowledgement for the season as well, and then that at least sets you up. The longer it went on for me, they just backed themselves into a corner a little bit. That's how it felt to me. And then something like last week happens, you do get some comms, but then a week on and nothing's happened. You've almost created a rod for your own back, haven't you?
I think something needed saying. Anything really. I think the fact there was a statement, regardless of what it says, and we'll get into the substance of what it says, but I think the fact there was a statement is a recognition that those inside the club are well aware of the fact that this needs to come to a close soon. They're well aware of the mood among the fan base. They're well aware of the kind of growing anxiety, growing concern, growing anger. In terms of what it was said, the use of the word imminent has been thrown out. I mean, how many times have you written it in the last week alone? Because I think I've included it in every Sunderland piece I've written. Now, without kind of getting pickety, Kirill Dreyfus said he hoped it was going to be imminent, not that it would be imminent.
Yeah.
And he then went on to say that we're hoping, in words of, we're kind of coming to the end of the recruitment process. Now, that was before the Liam Rosenior developments. At that stage, how confident were they that they were going to land Liam Rosenior? I would imagine if they were doing it again now, they'd still say that they hope it's going to be imminent, but that's not necessarily to say it is. But we are getting to the point, aren't we, with the players coming back, where even if you're at plan E, plan F, wherever you are, you just need a head coach in place, don't you? It's because you can't have the players coming back for pre-season without a manager in place. Surely Mike Dodds would have to lead the team, wouldn't he, again as interim? Because if you don't, if it wasn't to be Dodds, for example, if it was to be Marti, well, that obviously raises questions around Dodds, doesn't it? Could he then stay in a role? There's those question marks. And just on Cifuentes at QPR, the problem with that, he did a great job at QPR. I don't think he's got the recognition he deserves for that job. For all Danny Rowe, has clearly been held up for the remarkable job he did there. QPR was second bottom. I think they'd lost 14 or 15 games when he went in. And I saw them early on in the season, and they were rubbish under Gareth Ainsworth, absolutely rubbish. They were a good team under Cifuentes and finished level on points with Sunderland. The problem is, we don't know where we aren't privy to what's going on, but would he be interested in a move to Sunderland? Has there been contact made? Because if there hasn't been, then you're looking at a pretty drawn out process, aren't you, to agree compensation, to agree to see things develop. Now, things might be, again, speculatively, things might have been he's a bookie's favourite. I don't think that means much. We know he's liked, but I think there's always been an acknowledgement that because he's in a job, that's going to be difficult. It still feels to me like that's a long shot.
Yeah, I mean, you've taken some of the stuff I was going to say out there. He joined them second bottom. They'd won 2 games in the first 14. He then won 13 of 32, and that's including having a bit of a wobble in December, sort of 6 or 7 games without a win. It was a really good job that he did there because QPR, they looked doomed, didn't they, after the first couple of months of the season. I mean, where do you think that would sit, though? Is that an appointment that I mentioned earlier? It will be showing a little bit of intent going out and getting someone from another club. Do you think that's something that will be shared amongst the fan base, that would be a little bit of intent? Do you think he's a name, just based on that job with QPR last season, is something that would appease supporters, that would people get on board with and get behind and see the sort of just acknowledge the approach in going and getting someone like him?
I think he'd be a good appointment. Just purely, I think Danny Rowe would clearly have been an immense appointment. He's done a great job at Sheffield Wednesday. I watched an interview he did this week. Was it with the coach's voice? Or he's going up and up. But I think Cifuentes would be a good appointment. I'm judging this purely on the work he did last season at QPR. I'm not going to lie and pretend I know, you know, I can go back and look at the work he's done previously. And I do think taking a head coach from another club is a show of intent. It shows you're not just settling, doesn't it? But I don't know. I hope I'm wrong, but it feels. I don't know whether, I think unlikely might be too strong, but I think it feels difficult, doesn't it, at this stage?
If it was going to be
fans love him. QPR would be desperate to keep him. What's never been made clear is what type of compensation fee you'd be looking at. Yeah. That came out, didn't it? So at Sheffield Wednesday, at that end, they were clearly quite keen to make it known just how costly it'd be to take Roll from Hillsborough and how even more costly it'd be to take his coaching team with him. It's never come out from the QPR end. Maybe that's an indication that things haven't at all progressed and that this is still all at a very speculative stage. If Sunderland really, like, I mean, they've got to have sounded him out, aren't they? They've got to have kind of tried to get a feel for whether he'd be interested in the move at this stage. They've got to have done. If they're going to make a firm move, if they haven't already, it's got to be imminent, hasn't it?
Imminent again, yeah. That's the thing. You go back to that word. If it is going to be him, you'd almost think that, well, it's not yet going to be imminent, is it? Because we haven't heard anything in terms of a compensation fee being agreed, and those sort of processes obviously take a little bit of time. It could be very well be in them and have been in them since the beginning of the week, since we got the Rosenior news. But you tend to feel that, or you tend to see some sort of signs of progression with that. Or a club like QPR, for example, might come out and say, we've granted Sunderland permission, for example. As we understand it, we're not anywhere near that stage yet. So that would suggest that there's still a bit more time to run, even if it was Cifuentes, and then you've got to get them in, hold talks with them, where we've seen other managers sort of walk away from it as well. So that by no means that would be a done deal, would it?
No, and that's the thing, isn't it? It would feel like if you're going through the process of taking someone out of another club, there are various stages to go through, aren't there? I think, first of all, it would be made known probably at the QPR end that there'd been an approach and that they'd granted permission and that sort of thing. Then there's the negotiation stage. Well, we know from the various other candidates who Sunderland have spoken to that it's absolutely no guarantee at all that that's seamless and that leads to an agreement. So that wouldn't be swift, would it? That the fear there would be a drawn out appointment. Now the problem is, if it's not him, who is it? Because that's where we're now at a stage where, you know, I'll sit here and admit if it wasn't him, I wouldn't have the foggiest. I would not be able to sit here now. We did a piece, didn't we, earlier this week, where we kind of did put our thoughts down each on the kind of state of the search and where Sunderland are at now and what we think the next appointment's going to be. And you messaged me last night, didn't you, saying, am I all right? Saying my prediction is an unnamed candidate. And I'm like, well, I know that's a complete cop-out, but yes, because like, I don't know. If it's not Cifuentes from QPR, then it's got to be Andy. Unless the Rosenior to Burnley thing doesn't happen. Scott Parker's odds, again, I know bookies' odds don't mean much in the managerial thing, but Scott Parker's odds tumbled in yesterday, so he was 1-2 favourite. If Rosenior wasn't to get the Burnley job, then what does he do then? Does he then reassess and make himself known that he wants a Sunderland job, or does he sit tight and wait for the inevitable openings that come in October time when clubs start to panic? That's the decision for him, because managers can't leave it too long, can they?
I mean, Scott Parker, there's another name that's not been considered at Sunderland, has it? Or it's been in the public domain, another manager sort of out of work. But if we're sort of thinking that, it makes you wonder what the players are thinking. And we've got a little bit more evidence of that this week with the news of Dan Neil sort of stalling over a new long-term contract. Chris Rigg, a couple of weeks ago, similar. That's worrying, isn't it? There's no other way to dress that up. If you've got two key players, Dan Neil is one of your most valuable assets. Chris Rigg, one of your most valuable assets, regardless of only being 16 years old. If two players there are reluctant or hesitant to commit their long-term future because they kind of want to see what's happening with the head coach situation, it's worrying. Add Jack Clark into that. You know, you've got you then have 3 of your biggest assets potentially within 2 years of leaving the club.
Yeah, and this leads back to the whole transfer situation, both ins and outs contracts, doesn't it? We know that Sunderland, the vast majority of clubs now, do not work with a model where your manager or your head coach is making all the transfer decisions. But the head coach needs a say, doesn't it? Needs a say. Now, Sunderland will have targets in place, but does the as the potential incoming head coach, does he know who they are? Has he had his say on them? Will he come in with targets of his own? How will that sit with those above? And with the likes of Neil, Rigg, I think Clark's different, isn't he? Because this was always going to be a summer where Clark's exit felt not inevitable, but certainly likely, more likely than previous windows. With Neil and Rigg, I think that just adds to the sense of urgency around the whole situation now. With Neil especially, obviously with Rigg, but he's slightly different just with his age and his contract situation. But there's knowing that there's with Neil, Sunderland 2 years left, still feel in a position of power. I guess they'd like to back themselves and think that when the new head coach comes in, we can set out kind of what our hope is, and then hopefully we'll get the players on side. But you can completely understand players exercising a bit of caution at the minute, can't you? Because as you said at the start, the players will be having the same conversations and the same thoughts that we're having, won't they? They'll be asking the same questions, and they'll want answers as well. I suspect that the players like us could never have possibly imagined that we get to this stage in June and there's still not a head coach in place.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine if you're a player and if you go back in a couple of weeks' time and there isn't a head coach in there? What would that message be to you? You could. It's almost unthinkable, isn't it?
Well, I think that the thing there is it's not just the fact that you're going back in and there's no head coach in place, and there's obviously all the questions that prompts. But it then leads to when the new head coach comes in, has he already been undermined because you're thinking, well, how far down the list was this fella if it was an out of work manager, for example, and he was to come in early July, then the obvious question is, well, if you really, really wanted him, wouldn't you have got him a month, 2 months, 3 months ago? It just feels absolutely impossible to get to a stage where at the end of this month, before the players come back, we have not got a new head coach in place, doesn't it? It feels like it has to happen before then.
I mean, the Neil one, again, similar to Clark, isn't it? But within that, there's also a little bit of caution because you're at the point where the value is at the max of what it's going to be, isn't it? If they're not going to sign a new deal, that value is only going to depreciate between now and over the next 24 months when the deal runs out. So what do? Do you cash in and get the most that you can get? Sunderland have always said that they're in no rush to sell and they'll take a premium fee to get some of these players out. But that fee's only going to decrease, isn't it, between now and whenever a player may or may not go. If the intention's there for a Neil or a Clark not to sign a new deal, an extension, what is there a decision to be made? Do you think? I mean, the Rigg one's a little bit more pressing because he can sign his first pro deal next week. So are we in a position, do you think, with Rigg switching it to him, where not having a new head coach now, you are at serious risk of losing him because he can join somebody as of next week when he turns 17?
Yeah, you are. If he is genuinely, all the indications have been, haven't there? Prior to kind of recent developments, that Rigg's happy at Sunderland, that he was kind of the path has been laid out to him. Like clearly, Rigg can go on to achieve kind of huge things in the future. But the suggestions have always been that he realizes he's in the best place now. He realizes he's going to play football. He realizes that there's going to be the path there for him to continue progressing. Now, that's always been clear over even during the last year when there's been the managerial turbulence. That's always been pretty clear, hasn't it? Because you've had there's been a sense of continuity amid the chaos, really. Whereas now, everyone's completely in the dark as to what comes next. So if you're Chris Rigg, like, you'd be understandably reluctant to commit anything until you knew what the future looked like. Same with Dan Neil. I think the Neil one, like you said, there's clearly a decision that has to be made this summer. If the indications are that Neil isn't going to sign a new deal, now there's a difference there, isn't there, between Neil isn't going to sign a new deal or he just wants to sit tight until the new manager comes in, and then you might be able to make a breakthrough there. But it just makes you, I think, kind of brings you back to the bigger picture, really, and the bigger picture concerns surrounding Sunderland. Because let's look back 12 months ago when there was so much excitement after such a brilliant season, after such an exciting season, after such a positive season. It was, you could go through the team and pick out the players who looked destined for the Premier League and who were shining at the Stadium of Light, and you would looked at it then and said potential targets. Like, what a place to come and play football. 40-odd thousand in the stands every week, a manager who puts his arm around you and gets the best out of young, talented players, everyone pulling in the same direction. Now, whether you're already in the squad or whether you're a target at the minute, does any of that stand now,
No.
12 months down the line? And I think that all just adds to the uncertainty surrounding everything: the head coach situation, contract wrangles, transfer targets. We're at a stage now, we're at the middle of June, and there's not really any clarity on anything.
Yeah, just to close it off, I mean, we'll go into more depth in this in podcasts next week, I would imagine. But with the transfer window, it was already a big summer, wasn't it? Just with how this season, last season, finished. It was already a big summer. It needed not an overhaul, but it needed some strong additions, didn't it? Compared to last summer, I've actually got a piece coming out with our Sunderland over the weekend that looks at some of the minutes played from the 11 summer signings, and it's quite alarming, to be honest, how few minutes the majority of those signings played this season. Outside of Joe Bellingham, the recruitment has got to be miles better this summer. It's got to be players who can come in and make an impact, and not players that need to be sort of refined and polished, isn't it?
And all three head coaches last year made that point, didn't they? Tony Mowbray, Michael Beale and Mike Dodds all kind of in one way or another alluded to the need for balance this summer, alluded to the need to bring in more experienced players to strengthen the team, not just the squad with potential stars of the future, but to strengthen the team with ready-made talents. Now, I think it says everything that we're, more than half an hour into this video on the day the transfer window opens, and we haven't really touched on the transfer window. We haven't really touched on what's needed, and a fair bit's needed, really, isn't it? There are a couple of standout positions: central midfield, a striker, obviously. And that's before you get to the question of, like, what happens if Clark goes? What happens if Neil goes now? What happens if Rigg doesn't commit? These are all questions. Patterson, there's kind of constantly a bit of the question marks over his future, and then that's been for the last year or so. It is a huge summer, which again just adds to this feeling of urgency, doesn't it? Because when the head coach comes in, it feels like things need to fall into place very quickly afterwards. Otherwise, you are undoubtedly, inevitably going to be playing catch up.
Yeah, and that's where I was going to finish. The season starts 8 weeks' time. That will quickly come. Like I said, the players come back in a fortnight. Then you're into pre-season, which I mean, there's still a couple of games still to be announced for pre-season yet as well. And then you're into the swing of it. That will sharp come round, that first game of the season. I think the fixtures come out in 10 days' time. You very much, once we're into the cycle now, it comes around quickly, and Sunderland are a very, very dangerous risk of, like you said, they're having to play a catch-up here from the start, aren't they?
And I think the problem is, when you look back at the Championship in recent seasons, there are various examples of it's how you finish that matters, not how you start. Nottingham Forest went up. Middlesbrough probably should have gone up the year when they started dreadfully. Michael Carrick went in. Coventry and Middlesbrough both started dreadfully last season and got themselves in the playoff mix. But at Sunderland, it's got to be different because of the mood. Forget what's happening on the pitch, but because of the mood surrounding the club, because of the understandable apathy, anger on the back of last season, they just can't afford to make a bad start to next season. They have to draw a line, don't they, and start positively to ensure that everyone's looking forward and not back. Because if you don't start well, then all the anxiety, all the anger, everything just creeps back in again. And that's not going to help the players on the pitch. It's completely understandable, but it's not going to help the players on the pitch. That's why it feels like a positive start is more important than ever before, really.
Absolutely, and that's a good place to draw a line under this one. Dom, thank you for your time this morning. Really enjoyed that one. We've been in partnership with the Fans Museum and Cospex Opticians. We'll be back next week for more briefings. Make sure you subscribe to our page. It's just £1 for 6 months worth of content. And yeah, we'll join you next week. Enjoy the England game over the weekend if you're watching, and the beginning of the Euros, and hopefully the next time we join you a little bit further down the line with a head coach search. Thanks again.